All right, so today we're diving deep into workplace English,
Sounds good.
and we've got a transcript from Real English Talk to kind of unpack this topic.
Okay.
And they use this really clever scenario. It's like workplace drama meets a language lesson to show how to ask for help politely in English.
Interesting.
I'm curious to see what we can pull out of this for our listeners.
Yeah, it's a great approach because, let's face it, who hasn't felt a little lost in a new job?
Totally.
It's a universal experience.
Yeah.
And this podcast episode starts right there with Anna feeling totally overwhelmed in her new office.
I can totally relate to Anna. It's like you're trying to learn the ropes and navigate this new environment. And oh yeah, do it all in a second language.
Exactly.
No pressure, right?
Yeah.
But you know what strikes me is how the podcast highlights the importance of even these seemingly simple interactions, like asking a colleague for a file.
Exactly. The episode shows how those small exchanges can make or break your day.
Right?
And it all comes down to how you phrase things.
Oh, for sure. Take, for instance, when Anna's colleague Paul asks her for the CBL file.
Okay.
He says, "Would you be able to find the CBL file for me?"
Okay.
Notice how he uses "would you be able to."
Yeah.
It's subtle, but it softens the request,
It does.
making it less like a demand and more like a polite inquiry.
It's interesting because he could have just said, get me the CBL file.
Right.
But by using would you be able to,
Yeah.
he's implying this respect for Anna's time and autonomy.
Exactly.
Like he's acknowledging she has a choice to say yes or no.
Yes.
It's not just a command.
Precisely. It's a great example of what linguists call indirect language,
Okay.
which is often used in professional settings to create a more harmonious and respectful environment.
I see.
Think of it like this. In many English-speaking workplaces, directness can be perceived as aggressive, whereas indirectness shows consideration for the other person's feelings.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So it's not just about being polite. It's also about understanding the cultural nuances of the workplace.
But here's where it gets interesting. Anna can't find the file,
Okay.
and she asks Tom for help, saying, "Tom, how do I find the CBL file?"
Yeah.
Now, to me, that sounds pretty neutral,
Mhm.
not necessarily rude.
True. But if we compare it to Paul's earlier request,
Okay.
we can see a difference in politeness.
Okay.
Anna's request is very direct.
Yeah.
It lacks those softening phrases that Paul used.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small detail.
Right.
But in a workplace, setting those small details can have a big impact.
Yeah, and it's not just about the wording.
Hmm?
It's also about the tone. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
we've all encountered those colleagues who can make even the simplest request sound like a demand.
Right.
So it's about finding that balance between being clear and being considerate.
For sure.
But the episode doesn't stop there. It actually offers listeners specific phrases to use in these situations.
Yeah.
I love that they break it down like that.
It's so helpful.
Yeah.
They offer phrases like, could you possibly, would you mind? And I was wondering if you could...
Yeah.
These phrases are like magic spells for workplace harmony.
Okay.
They take the edge off a request and make it sound less demanding.
But I'm curious.
Yeah.
Isn't there a risk of sounding too formal or even insincere if you overuse these phrases?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wouldn't it get a bit repetitive if every request was super indirect?
That's a great question. And you're right. It's all about finding the right balance.
Yeah.
Context is key.
Correct.
If you're asking a close colleague for a small favor, a simple, could you, might suffice.
Right.
But if you're asking for a bigger favor, or if you're addressing someone more senior,
Uh-huh.
those more elaborate phrases can demonstrate extra respect and consideration.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like you're adjusting your level of formality based on the situation and your relationship with the person.
Exactly.
So it's not just about memorizing a list of phrases, it's about understanding the social dynamics at play.
Right.
But let's get back to Anna's story. She's still struggling to find that file.
Yes, and this is where we see the consequences of not using those polite phrases.
Okay.
Tom suggests she asks Denise.
Mm-hmm.
But again, Anna goes for a very direct approach. Denise, please email me the CBL file,
Uh-huh.
even though she uses please.
Yeah.
It still comes across as abrupt.
And Denise's reaction is priceless.
Oh, yeah.
She basically gives Anna the side eye
Right.
and makes it clear that a simple please wasn't enough to sugarcoat that blunt request.
Exactly. This scene highlights a crucial point.
Okay.
Even with a please tacked on, a direct request can still sound demanding if it lacks those other elements of politeness that we've been talking about.
So it's not just about saying the magic word. It's about crafting the entire sentence in a way that conveys respect and consideration.
Exactly.
But luckily for Anna and for us listening in,
Right.
the podcast doesn't leave her hanging.
Yeah.
They actually pause the action and give a mini lesson on how to rephrase that request to sound more polite.
Yes, and they offer a few different options, each slightly more polite than the last.
Okay.
For example, could you possibly email me the CBL file? Or, I was wondering if you could email me the CBL file.
Right.
These options are all indirect and convey a sense of respect for Denise's time and effort.
It's like they're giving us a backstage pass to the world of polite English.
Exactly.
And the best part is they demonstrate how these subtle changes in wording can completely transform the interaction.
Yes.
When Anna tries this new approach with Denise, the whole atmosphere shifts.
It does.
Denise is suddenly much more willing to help.
Right.
It's amazing how a few well-chosen words can make all the difference.
It really showcases the power of language.
Yeah.
It's not just about conveying information. It's about building rapport, establishing trust,
Yeah.
and creating a more positive and productive working relationship.
And it makes me think about how we often focus on learning grammar rules and vocabulary.
Right.
But sometimes it's these subtle nuances of phrasing that can truly elevate our communication skills.
Absolutely. It's
Okay.
like the difference between knowing the notes on a piano and actually playing a beautiful melody.
Ooh, I like that.
It's the subtle touches, the phrasing, the dynamics that bring the music to life.
Yeah.
And it's the same with language.
I love that analogy.
Thanks.
So we've seen how these polite phrases can help Anna get the information she needs.
Mm-hmm.
But the episode doesn't stop there.
No, it doesn't.
It goes on to show her using these phrases in other situations, like offering help and making suggestions.
Right.
I'm curious to see how these same principles apply in those contexts.
Me too. It'll be interesting to see how she adapts these phrases to different situations.
Yeah.
And how those subtle changes impact her interactions with the colleagues. Plus, I think there's a lot we can all learn from observing how Anna navigates these everyday workplace challenges.
Exactly. I'm ready to dive deeper into this episode and see what other gems we can uncover.
Yeah.
But first, I'd love to hear what stood out to you so far.
For me, it's the realization that politeness in English isn't just about saying please and thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's about understanding the subtle nuances of language
Right.
and using it to create a more harmonious and respectful work environment.
Well said. And for me, it's that reminder that even small changes in phrasing can make a big difference in how our message is received.
Yeah,
It's about being mindful of the impact our words have on others
for sure.
and choosing to communicate in a way that builds relationships rather than creating barriers.
Absolutely.
So are you ready to continue this deep dive into the fascinating world of workplace English?
Let's do it. Okay, so let's see how Anna handles those everyday office annoyances, like getting interrupted. The podcast throws her right into the fire with this colleague who just keeps cutting her off during a project explanation.
It's like nails on a chalkboard.
Right.
You can almost feel Anna's frustration. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one thing to be interrupted in a casual conversation,
Uh-huh.
but when you're trying to present this clear, structured thought,
Right.
it's a whole different ballgame.
Absolutely. And it's tempting to just power through,
Oh, yeah.
especially when you're passionate about the topic. But the podcast emphasizes that interrupting, even with good intentions, can really derail a conversation
Yeah.
and undermine the speaker.
But how do you handle that without coming across as rude or dismissive?
Right.
It's such a delicate balance.
It is.
But luckily, Real English Talk provides some really helpful strategies.
They do.
Okay.
They suggest using phrases like, if I could just finish my thought,
Mhm.
or I understand your point, and I'll address that in a moment.
Okay.
These phrases are genius because they acknowledge the interrupter while politely asserting your right to continue.
What I found fascinating is their suggestion of mirroring the interrupter's language.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost like this subtle form of judo,
Right.
like redirecting their energy back to the main point.
Right. They give this great example where Anna says, I hear your enthusiasm, and I'm excited about that idea too, now going back to what I was saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's brilliant because it validates the interrupter's contribution.
Yeah.
While seamlessly guiding the conversation back on track, it's like saying, we're on the same team, but let's stay focused.
It's such a valuable takeaway.
It is.
It's not about silencing the other person. It's about maintaining the flow of the conversation
Yeah.
and ensuring everyone feels heard. But let's shift gears a bit. The podcast also tackles another communication minefield,
Okay.
expressing disagreement.
Ooh, that's a tricky one.
This is something I personally struggle with.
Right.
How do you voice your concerns without sparking a conflict?
Well, it's a skill that requires both honesty and diplomacy.
Yeah.
Real English talk suggests using phrases like, I see your point, but,
Okay.
or I appreciate your perspective, however.
Mm-hmm.
These phrases create a buffer, acknowledging the other person's viewpoint before presenting an alternative.
It's like building a bridge instead of putting up a wall.
Right.
You're creating a space for dialogue rather than confrontation.
Exactly.
What I also appreciate is their emphasis on focusing on the issue, not the person.
Yes, it's the difference between saying, you're wrong about this,
Right.
which is a direct attack, and saying, I have a different understanding of this data,
Mm-hmm.
which keeps the focus on the topic at hand.
It reminds me of a communication technique I learned about called the hamburger method
Oh, yeah.
for delivering constructive criticism.
Okay.
You start with a positive statement, then deliver the criticism, and then end with another positive.
Right.
It's a way of softening the blow while still getting your point across.
I love that it's like sandwiching the tough stuff between two slices of positivity.
Exactly.
It makes the feedback more palatable and less likely to trigger defensiveness.
Yeah, and you know what's striking me is how these principles of respectful communication apply far beyond the office walls.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether you're navigating a disagreement with a friend, a family member, or
Right.
even someone online, these techniques can help foster a more productive and less emotionally charged conversation. It's about recognizing that everyone has their own perspective and approaching those differences with curiosity rather than judgment.
So well said. But let's not forget about the elephant in the room.
Oh, here we go.
Office politics.
We're done.
The podcast doesn't shy away from this tricky terrain, and I have to commend them for tackling it head on.
This is where things get really juicy.
Yes, it is.
They set up this scenario where Anna overhears a conversation that casts this shadow of doubt on some of her colleagues' motives. It's like a workplace thriller.
It is, and it highlights a crucial skill for navigating any professional environment.
Okay.
Reading between the lines.
Ooh, yes.
It's about understanding not just what people say,
Mm-hmm.
but also what they don't say, and picking up on those subtle cues that reveal the underlying dynamics at play.
It's like they're teaching us to be workplace detectives.
Right, and they give some great advice.
Yeah, okay.
Like paying attention to who aligns with whom, observing power dynamics,
Uh-huh.
and understanding unspoken agendas.
It's about gathering information to understand the landscape and navigate it effectively.
Right.
Not to spread rumors or create drama.
Exactly, and they also stress the importance of discretion,
Oh, for sure.
which is so crucial in any professional setting.
Yes.
Who you confide in, how you share information,
Right.
and what battles you choose to fight.
Right.
These are all critical decisions that can impact your career trajectory.
It's a reminder that the workplace is this complex ecosystem.
Right.
And understanding those unwritten rules can be just as important as mastering your technical skills.
Exactly. It's like they're giving us a secret playbook for surviving and thriving in the office jungle.
Ooh, I like that.
But they also offer a powerful message about staying true to your own values and principles.
Okay.
Even amidst the pressures of office politics, it's about being strategic without compromising your integrity.
That's such a vital point. It's easy to get caught up in the game,
Right.
but ultimately our values are what define us as professionals and as human beings.
Right.
And I have to say, the podcast does a brilliant job of weaving these ethical considerations into their narrative.
They do.
It's not just about winning at all costs.
Yeah.
It's about building a career that you can be proud of.
Absolutely. And they do it in a way that feels authentic and relatable. It's not preachy.
Right.
It's simply about recognizing that our actions have consequences and that building a positive work environment starts with each of us.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
From handling interruptions to navigating office politics.
Right.
It's amazing how this seemingly simple episode on asking for help has opened up this whole world of insights into the complexities of workplace communication.
It really has.
Huh.
And I think it speaks to the power of storytelling as a teaching tool.
Yeah.
By immersing ourselves in Anna's journey,
Right.
we're not just learning abstract concepts, we're experiencing those challenges and triumphs alongside her,
Yeah.
which makes the lessons all the more impactful.
I couldn't agree more, but before we wrap up this section, I'm curious what's resonating most with you from this deep dive so far.
For me, it's the realization that effective communication is about so much more than just the words we use. It's about understanding the unspoken rules, reading between the lines,
Yeah.
and adapting our approach based on the context and the individuals involved. It's about being mindful, strategic,
Right.
and above all, respectful.
That's a brilliant summary. And for me, it's that reminder that these skills aren't just for the workplace.
Yeah.
They're life skills.
Right.
Whether we're negotiating with a vendor, resolving a conflict with a loved one, or simply trying to have a productive conversation with a stranger.
Right.
These principles of polite and respectful communication can make all the difference.
Absolutely. So are you ready to explore the final act of Anna's workplace adventure
Yeah.
and see what other gems we can uncover?
Yeah. Let's do it. I'm eager to see how she applies these lessons and what final takeaways Real English Talk has in store for us. We've seen Anna tackle some pretty tricky situations, like from handling interruptions to navigating those office politics.
Yes, she has.
I'm really impressed with how much she's learned in such a short time.
She's definitely come a long way.
It really shows how even small changes in our communication style can have a big impact
Oh, for sure.
on our interactions and ultimately on our success in the workplace.
Absolutely.
But what's interesting is Real English Talk.
Yeah.
They don't just leave us with a set of these handy phrases.
Okay.
They offer something I find even more valuable,
What's
a
that?
shift in perspective.
Tell me more.
They introduce this concept called the echo effect,
Okay.
which essentially encourages us to pay close attention to the communication styles of those around us,
Interesting.
especially those we admire or consider effective communicators.
Oh, I like that.
So it's like consciously choosing who we allow to influence our communication style.
Right? It's like we're building this virtual board of directors
Yeah.
made up of individuals whose communication skills we want to emulate.
Exactly. And it makes me think about how powerful it can be to simply be more mindful of the language and the tone being used around us.
Yeah.
We're constantly bombarded with communication, both positive and negative.
Right.
And by being more aware, we can choose which patterns we want to adopt and which ones we want to avoid.
Yeah. It's like we're given this set of tools
Right.
and we get to decide which ones we want to use to build our own communication style.
Yeah, it's empowering.
It is.
And speaking of empowerment, the podcast ends on a really inspiring note.
Oh, tell me.
They encourage listeners to become mentors themselves,
I love that.
to pay it forward and share those hard-earned communication skills with others
Yeah.
who might be struggling with those same challenges.
Right. Like even small acts of guidance can make a huge difference.
Exactly. They emphasize that it could be as simple as offering a helpful phrase or, pointing out a subtle communication misstep.
Right.
Or simply being a supportive and encouraging presence.
Yes,
It's about creating this culture of mentorship and continuous learning
for sure.
within our workplaces.
It reinforces the idea that we all have something to offer regardless of our experience level.
Right.
We can all contribute to creating a more positive and supportive communication environment.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Real English Talk,
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say we've gained far more than just a few polite phrases.
Absolutely.
We've been given this framework for understanding the nuances of workplace communication and a set of tools for navigating those complexities with confidence and grace.
Well said.
And I think the key takeaway here is to not just passively absorb this information, but to actively apply it in our own lives.
It's like learning any new skill.
Yeah.
It takes practice. It takes conscious effort.
Right.
And it takes a willingness to step outside of our comfort zones.
Absolutely.
But the rewards are immeasurable.
To our listener, we encourage you to go out there and use your voice with intention, with clarity, and with respect.
Yes, embrace that echo effect. Seek out those positive communication role models and let their mastery inspire your own.
And remember, even small acts of mentorship can create this ripple effect of positive communication within your workplace and beyond.
Until next time, happy communicating.
Well, that wraps up this episode of The Deep Dive. We hope you enjoyed this exploration of workplace English and that you feel empowered to take your communication skills to the next level.